Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Shuit's Corner. I'm your host, Shuit, and in this podcast episode, I would like to talk about contentment. In Philippians, in Paul's letter to the Christians in Philippi, in the 4th chapter, verse 11, St. Paul says, I have learned to be content in his circumstances, or as he was writing, in my circumstances. I think now this is dependent on the translation that you'd be reading in English, because I still read the Bible in English. But I think it's noteworthy that St. Paul says, I have learned to be content. And I think that that's a reality of life that you learn how to just really deal with life. I remember in college, the dean of students, I believe he was explaining how the college campus was like a bag of rocks, and that in the beginning we're all pretty jaded rocks, in the sense that for most of us it was our first time going to school, maybe living on our own outside of our parents' home, and so there was a lot of we may have been set in our ways. And we were also perhaps not familiar to this type of environment as well, a college campus. But he said it's as if when you shake the bag of rocks, the more you shake it, the less jaded the rocks become with one another. And that sooner or later, the rough edges are smoothed out, and there's not as much friction or tension between a lot of the rocks. And I think that's a great illustration of how, for us students, for the incoming class, that made sense in theory, but as we lived out our lives on campus and after school in the real world, I think that's very much true, I think, in a lot of cases, and not only incoming freshmen to school. I think life is, in general, learning how to not be so jaded. And with whatever situation you find yourself in, whether it be at work or with your family or playing sports, doing your hobbies, it's there's always an element of learning. Life does have a steep learning curve, but I believe the older you become, and hopefully the more mature you become as you age, I think that's when you pretty much got a grip on life in terms of being more capable of dealing with whatever life throws at you. And so I wanted to talk about contentment because I read recently that we still end up becoming, or we still remain dreamers. And this person was describing how, even though they're content with the life they have, it's not like this inherent or this innate ability to dream of a loftier life, how that does not all of a sudden disappear. And that's what spurred me to make this podcast episode, because I think that's a misconception we all have that one day we won't have that yearning for other things. And I think that for a lot of us, I believe that's called the hedonic treadmill, or the hedonic principle, that human beings have an insatiable appetite for material things. But the problem with that inherent desire that we have is that no matter how far we go out of our way to acquire all the material wealth, none of it is ultimately satisfying in the end. They do say after about $75,000 of income, the quality of your life doesn't really change as much as it does if you make less than 75,000. That might be because of just your needs, having to, meet your needs and live a functional life. But the hedonic principle just says it's a never-ending, cycle of just wanting to acquire whatever you can acquire, and also believing that that's what's going to satiate your appetite, that yearning, that longing that we all have inside of us. But I did think it was very revelatory that this person said that we were, it's not like that ends all of a sudden. It's not like we realize this, that, okay, I have to be content. That means somehow because I'm content on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm not going to be, conjuring up a better life, or what I think would be a better life for me. And it's like, no, these two things go hand in hand, in the sense that they're both realities that you're going to experience, at the same time. That, yes, I'm content with what I have in my life, but it's not like at the same time I can, I'd still perhaps feel jealousy or envy or covet something that my neighbor has, or that somebody else might have. And I think this is good for us to know that it does go hand in hand. And the key is to just check that impulse. By checking, I don't mean trying to rewire yourself, because that's just innately who we are. That's kind of how we operate. But by checking, I simply mean just acknowledging not only when you have that desire, or that yearning, but just also, I think, acknowledging that this is who I am. That, this desire for wanting what other people may have, for example, that you might not, be desiring anything that someone has today, but it does not necessarily mean that it might not happen tomorrow, or that, the grass is always greener on the other side, as they say. But it's all just a perspective, in the sense that it's a way. It's really just a paradigm, or just a way that you look at the world, a frame by which you see the world. And it's important for us to know that that we're hardwired this way. And I think that takes away some of the guilt or shame or discomfort that we feel whenever we do covet something that our neighbor might have, because as Christians we are, to love our neighbor as ourselves. So we wouldn't necessarily covet what they have. And this goes all the way back to the command, one of the commandments that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. But it's, and sometimes when we do go against things that Scripture, that we read in Scripture to inform ourselves of what it means to be a Christian, I think that we also learn the guilt and the shame and the discomfort we feel is taken away when we realize that it's simply, you might as well call it a biological feature of ourselves. Now, it's not necessarily, a physical entity like an organ or anything like that, but that's just how deeply, just how inherent it is in us. Like it's part of our fiber almost. And that, realizing this and saying, oh, what I'm doing right now is not necessarily something that's a problem because it's just something that I do. Sort of incorporating this understanding of dreaming. I'm calling it dreaming. That's not a psychological term for it. But this need for something better aside from what I possess at the moment, or liking something that someone else has, that these are all things that are simply a habit of our mind. And I think that helps, with dealing with that, sometimes the frustration that might come with trying to be one way and not being able to sort of pull it off, so to speak. So yeah, and I think contentment is also important because, it helps us realize that you don't need much. I mean, there's a ton of literature that speaks about the sort of the paradox of wealth and material wealth, how you can have much material wealth, but it does not necessarily correlate with your level of happiness. And people have tried, psychologists and scientists have tried this with people who have won the lottery, because they are kind of the quintessential example of what people, normally would dream of, which is winning the lottery for however many millions of dollars. And when they do, I've never read this research, but I've heard about it a ton of times. And whenever they speak with the lottery winners, there is a spike in their happiness initially when they do win the lottery. But after a while, it's about the same level. Their sort of level of happiness is about the same of the general population. And it even is a little less after a while. Like they're not as happy as the general population, or should I say they're a little bit a bit more depressed, in the sense that I'm not exactly sure what the variables are regarding why they become a bit more depressed than the general population. But, just in general, people do think that lottery winners kind of have it all, that they didn't have to, work by the sweat of their brow, and and having all these millions of dollars was kind of, the solution to a happy life. And but I think this is everyone's experience also, that what you don't work for, you don't necessarily appreciate as much as something that you did work for. And I remember I believe it was either Saint Ephraim or Saint Isaac the Syrian who had spoke about that. But that's also been a perfect example is gifts. Whether it's your birthday or Christmas, when you're gift giving during Christmas, gifts are not, it's a great token on behalf of the gift giver for sure. But as far as the level of attachment and the level of appreciation for the receiver, it's not as it's not as strong of an emotional attachment as it is for something that you had to work hard for and whatnot. So I just wanted to talk about contentment and this inherent need that we have to dream of a better future. And that as much as that's not necessarily bad in itself, I think recognizing that as a sort of a habit of our thinking mind, I think that's very key for us to help us live a healthier and happier life. And also realizing that because it's inherently part of our habit of mind, that it's not something that we can just get rid of. Whenever it does occur, then it's acknowledging it at that time. But it's not to say you acknowledge it once, then it's never going to pop up again and whatnot. But it's I think being content and in respect to dealing with this habit of mine that pops up in the future, just acknowledging that it is occurring again. So thank you for tuning in to Shuit's Corner. I was your host, or I am your host in the present tense, Shuit, and I will talk to you again in my next episode. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.